Jams, jams, jams. Picture books and jams. Welcome, everybody, to PBJAMZ. Music and picture books. What a perfect sandwich. Squish them all together. What a yummy snack.
All right, good morning or afternoon whenever you are joining us for this episode of PBJAMZ, something a little different for you today. You'll notice the screen is being shared by my brand new friend, Faye Duncan, who is the author of a bunch of books. The one we're going to talk about today is called This Train is Bound for Glory. So welcome, Alice. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so very much, Tani, for the invitation.
So talk to us a little bit about how this book got started. This Train is Bound for Glory. Where did that inspiration come from, and how did it take the direction that you took it?
Well, as you know, This Train is Bound for Glory. It's a Black spiritual, and it's a spiritual that was first recorded, I think, like in 1922.
Oh.
However, it's a tradition. It's an American tradition, something that was sung during the institution of American slavery. So if you think about it, like in your church experience, my church experience, This Train is Bound for Glory was a sacred song, and it was a song about going to heaven. Mm-hmm. But during the time of the Underground Railroad, if it is late at night and someone heard this song being sang on a clearing, and you heard This Train is Bound for Glory, it meant that for the enslaved who were ready to run away to pursue their freedom, it meant that tonight is the night, and this train, this Underground Railroad path of freedom, we are going north. And so that's the tradition, or that's the history of the song. But when it comes to how I, in this new generation, came to write the song, this is what happened. So I live in Memphis, mm-hmm. and during convocation, something called Kojic Convocation, that's the Church of God in Christ denomination, they used to come to Memphis once a year, like on a pilgrimage. It would be several thousands and thousands of these Black worshipers, Kojic worshipers, the sanctified church worshipers. They would be coming to Memphis. And in Memphis, there was this gospel shop called the Chambers Gospel Shop. And when they knew the saints were coming, they always packed up and stocked up on new music and new videos. And this was the time of cassette track tapes, right, and CDs and VHSs, okay? And so I always then made it a point that I visited the shop at that time, because then they would have all of the new gospel music. They would have all of the new VHSs. And I would love to hear the ministers on those VHSs, the prosperity ministers and everything. I would love to listen to them. So I would buy, it was going to be a fresh stock. So I would go to buy all my new tapes and all of my new VHS. And so when I went in this time, they were playing, the owner of the shop was playing Sister Rosetta Tharpe's This Train is Bound for Glory. Now, if you know Sister Rosetta Tharpe, you know that she is the godmother of rock and roll. Yep. She was an electric guitar player. But how did she become the godmother of rock and roll? She became the godmother of rock and roll playing Black spirituals and Black hymns and Black sacred songs. And when I heard it, it was, I'd sung the song as a child, but I had never heard it rocking like that. Yeah. And it's like, whoa, it was rocking. And so it was so joyful. And while the subject was heaven, it was a glimpse of heaven that was happy and filled with a music that made you want to dance. And because I was writing children's books at the time, I was like, I want to share that music with children. And so I went home. This was about 15 years ago, but I went home and I started trying to write This Train is Bound for Glory as a picture book. I also tried, the first one I did was not This Train is Bound for Glory. The first one that I tried writing as a picture book was Didn't It Rain? Because she also had a version of that rocks. Oh my God, it rocks, right? And And I wasn't successful in doing that until maybe like a couple of years ago, where I was able to finally find an editor at Penguin Random House that caught my vision for the book, right? And so I want to say that, and then, you know, because I know I've been talking, but I want to say that, but I want to share something else too. When I wrote This Train is Bound for Glory, and I finally found an editor who caught the vision and could see what I saw, my mother, I'm my mother's only child. And so my mother was 85 and she was very much alive, right? But by the time the book released, the summer of 2023, this summer, by the time the book released in the summer of 2023, my mother had passed away. She had gotten a diagnosis with cancer, and she was like passed in like 3 months. And so by the time this book released, my mother was gone. She wasn't here with me in the flesh. But now when I read this book and I'm reading it to children and reading it with children, I have so much joy, because the joy that I wanted to give to children is now the joy that I am experiencing myself, baby, because my mother is on the glory train, and you can't tell me no different, baby. You can't tell me no different. My mama is in heaven, and she is also, her spirit was with me, you know, buoying me and just giving me encouragement as I go along in this world without her, you know.
Yeah. I love that full circle moment, and how something that you created to be encouragement for other people came back and gave you courage in a difficult time. That's beautiful. And that's just part of what we do as teachers and as authors and as musicians. I mean, all three of those, you know, they're very hope filled ways that we bring joy to other people. So I love that it just kind of came full circle and gave that back to you. So obviously the illustrations in this book are just phenomenal. They really do communicate that. Like I think it's so cool to always see the marriage of text and illustration. And you were speaking about the joy and the encouragement, and these illustrations are absolutely full of joy, the bright colors, and
let's take the folks on a journey.
love it.
So this is the conductor on the train, and you know, we'd say conductor in some realms, and depending on your religious beliefs, you know, we'd say it's Jesus is our conductor on the train. Now, you know, I know you have a lot of folks who are writing, and they're wanting to do picture books. And so, you know, inspiration comes from a myriad of places. And my inspiration came from listening and hearing the music that day in the record shop. But also, I had two friends, their son, Rod and Trina, their son was a fireman, and he got killed in a car wreck. It was like a one car. It was like something was going on the road, raining or something, and he passed away. And their son used to always encourage me, and he would always say, "Oh, Miss Alice," because I would be like, "Oh, you know," his name was Ryan. I'd be like, "Oh, Ryan, you know, I really want to write a book." And I was always like going over his mom and his dad's house, sitting at their kitchen table, talking about, "Woe is me, my writing career, my writing career. Oh, whoa, whoa, whoa." And so their son would come in, and he goes, "Oh, Miss Alice," he goes, "you know, you're just a little engine that could. You're gonna make it." He's like, "You're gonna make it." And so when I wrote the book and I sold the manuscript, he was now an angel in heaven. And so I dedicated the book to him, because he always said that I was the little engine that could, and the story was about heaven, and it was about a train. And so, so he was, I say we have guardian angels, right? And so I know he's one of the guardian angels, along with my mother, who walks with me and keeps up with me as I go through, you know, what does the song say, the hymn say, this weary land, right?
Yeah.
And so the the illustrator is Paul Kellum. Paul Kellum is also the illustrator of the new award-winning picture book, The Little Mermaid. And so I had the fortune to have him as my illustrator, and he majors in vibrancy. He majors in emotion and always wanting to give children a reflection of themselves. So it was his idea to like make the main character a little boy who is who lives his life, you know, a full life operating from a wheelchair. He had a little character. There's a character there who has like a scar or something on his nose. You will see that the train has young people, it has old people, it has black people, white people, it's got Asian people, it's got flower children, it's got, you know, Hindu people, it's got young people, it's got, you know, people in a variety of shapes and a variety of sizes, it's got country people, it's got city people. And so, you know, in his illustrations, he's always very aware of making sure that when children are reading this book, that they see themselves, that they see their family, that they see their community. And so, you know, I felt very fortunate to work with Paul.
Yeah, these illustrations are just so full of color and vibrance and joy. Just love it. So
thank you.
Yeah. So I know before we started, we were talking about the fact that you are a retired teacher, national board.
Yes.
So and you've been writing the whole time that you've been teaching.
Yes.
So talk to me about how that influences either the subject matter or how you write your books. Is there a connection?
Well, there is a connection. Okay. So I started writing when I was very young. I started writing and teaching at the same time. So that was 1993. Okay. And I was in my 20s. I was in my early 20s when I started writing. And as a young person, writing, because I think I got like my first 2-book deal, like same year that I started teaching. And I was under the impression that, oh, I'm gifted, right? And I have the Midas, you know, I've got the Midas touch. Everything I write is gold, right? Because success in writing came so young. But because it came so young, I was really not interested in revision. I was not interested in editing because my first 2 books did not really require that much of editing and revision. It was just like grace. God's grace was upon me at the time. But as we know, being a national board teacher, what is most paramount? That you reflect, that you evaluate. And so it wasn't until like the early 2000s, after I had been teaching a while, and then I had gone through that national board process, which was required me to reflect, which required me to modify, to do over, revise, plan. It wasn't then that it was not until then that I applied the same principles that I found in good teaching, that I then applied it to my work. And then when I applied it to my work, I went from being a fledgling writer, because like from 1993, the time when I first started writing and I got that 2-book deal, when I was not a respecter of revision, not a respecter of editing, not a respecter of doing several drafts, then I only sold like maybe 1, 2, maybe 5 stories at the time. And of those 5 stories, only one of them is still in print. But then I got to that season of 2005, 2016, where I was majoring in rewriting, where I was majoring in revision. So by 2016, I started publishing again. And now since 2016 to now, I've published 13, many of them have not released, but I've sold 13 manuscripts. Wow. And the only difference between now and 1993, which is 30 years, the only difference between now and then is my respect for drafts. And we tell children that all the time when they're writing their books, like, baby, no, baby, you can't, no, the first draft, baby, that ain't acceptable. That's not, you need to go back, right? Well, I guess what was good for the student wasn't good for me. But when I learned what was good for the student was also good for me,
Yeah.
I began to experience another level of success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really, I say often, writing is a team sport, and people don't, when I first came into writing, I didn't realize, you hear a lot about how it's a solitary thing, this writing, but it really does require objective eyes to look at it with you and say, this part's fabulous, but this part's confusing, or this part doesn't sound like what you want it to sound like. And then you go back and you revise and you
right. And so, and like respecting, particularly like specifically, I would say, once you find an editor who will be your champion and they get your work, but you also need to be ready for listening to them, because your editor is going to require new iterations of the work. And like, for example, if you can see behind me, this book, that book, Memphis Martin and Mountaintop, I wrote that book 8 times. And then once I found the editor, she was like, oh, I love the story, I want to buy it. But then she's like, hey, but I got some news. I was like, what is that? She goes, you got to rewrite it again. So I had to then rewrite it like 9 times. But by that time, like, I was like, hey, I understand now that we're going for quality writing that resonates in the heart of the universal child.
Right.
And I got, if I have to fight for that, then I'm fighting for instruction. I'm fighting for like teaching my kids these tests, these test requirements, you know what I'm saying? I'm fighting, going to a faculty meeting and listening to the principal, like, say all the things we need to do to refine our building, refine our structure, right? So like, if I'm willing to do that, I'm refining my home, I'm refining my new roof, my new fence, my new mailbox, I'm getting the True Line Green, True Line Care. I'm refining everything else.
Right.
So the writing needs to be refined. And that book, nope, I can't get it. But anyways, Memphis Martin and Mountaintop was the book that taught me the lesson. Because it went from being like gibberish, but it was gibberish that my editor could see the vision in it.
Right.
And it went to being polished. And so it became the very first book I ever had to be like a Coretta Scott King honor book, right? And so now my dream is to keep writing well, not just writing or publishing to get a contract, but making sure that, like Jacob's Ladder, every round and every book, in terms of excellence, in terms of refinement, in terms of use of alliteration, in terms of use of symbolism, every book is like Jacob's Ladder. Every round is going higher and higher.
Yeah. Yeah. The power of revision. I love that. I love that phrase that you use, a respecter of revision. And that's really powerful. And and you're right. It definitely ties in with the national board, that idea of reflecting and looking at what works and looking at what doesn't, and then modifying what doesn't,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Powerful tools. So we've talked a little about the art, and we've talked about revision, and we've talked about the musical connections with it being and the old Black spiritual. I love how you've updated it though. Talk a little bit about the interactive element. That was something that you had wanted to mention, and it's one thing I love about this book is how you created an interactive element.
Well, the book is done in a call and response, just like a Dr. Watts hymn, or just like a spiritual, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. And other person like, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it. So it's done in like a call and response. It's written like a call and response. And so children can sing along with you, or like lining a hymn where, you know, the reader of the story can do the first line, but it's also going to be repetitive for the second line. So it allows interaction. But then there's something else that happens at the end of it, because when you are a school librarian, when you are a music teacher, you want to inspire children's creativity so that they implement and make pragmatic the thing that you just taught them, right? So at the end of this book, This Train is Bound for Glory, there is literally a, say it with me, template. There is a template showing the child how to create and make, or showing children how to create and make their own spiritual for their new generation, for their particular emotions, for their particular passions and what they want to write or talk about. And so the book is good for inspiring the creativity, or allowing a child to implement and activate their own creative genius, right? And what do we know about spirituals anyway? Spirituals are living songs. They change from person to person. They change from church to church. Spirituals change from city to city, region to region. Something that's a spiritual that's done in Texas may have a certain verse that's not done in Mississippi or Tennessee, or done in out west in California, right? And so spirituals are living documents, and I just want to make it clear to students when they read it that they can, like Jacob's Ladder, they can take the song higher and higher, you know, and make it applicable to what concerns them.
Right. Right. I love that. Love it. And so one thing that I always try to ask about is what's coming next for you. What are you working on right now that you are excited about? What's happening in your world that we can
Thank
look forward
you.
to?
I love that question. Okay, so I live in Memphis. Memphis is considered the front door of the Mississippi Delta. I grew up surrounded by blues music and blues musicians because Beale Street is here. The radio station WDIA, all my life while I've been living, and before I was alive, they had, you know, Blues Saturday. So literally your mom, your dad, your grandparents, they turn on WDIA, the radio station, on Saturday, and it's just blues music. It's B.B. King, it's Howlin' Wolf, it's Muddy Waters, it's Coco Taylor, it's Memphis Minnie. It's like all day long. And so I gained an appreciation for the blues when I was very young and loved it. But that's like, you know what? If we're going to have new blues musicians, we need to share blues music with children. So I'm very excited of things to come. I'm excited about some blues music books that have already been purchased but not released. One book that has been released is Yellow Dog Blues. I hope to talk to you about that later on another time. But then I have a book called Robert Johnson's Juneteenth Jamboree, which is a discussion of Robert Johnson. Robert Johnson, of course, you know, is the father of rock and roll. He was a proponent of Mississippi Delta blues, and he died very young. And so what people don't understand is while he lived in the Delta, he was educated in Memphis, he recorded his first and his last blues recordings that we have of him. He recorded them in Texas during Juneteenth of 1936. And so I want to share that with children, giving them, because now Juneteenth is a national holiday, and we're going to need more books about Juneteenth, books that go beyond just Galveston, Texas. We're going to need books that connect Juneteenth and show some joy and vitality and wonderment that will inspire children. And like Robert Johnson playing his blues on Juneteenth and on one of like the biggest Juneteenth celebrations in Texas, which was 1936. It's going to be great. So excited about that. Then I'm writing the official picture book, first official picture book and biography for children about B.B. King. And so that's on the way. Don't have a pub date for that yet.
Nice.
Then something that's happening, don't know when this will air, but something that's happening in August, does not have anything to do with music, but then sort of kind of does. I'm writing a biography on Coretta Scott King. It's a picture book biography written in verse on Coretta Scott King, and it's looking at her life through the lens of someone who was a prophet, who was an activist, and who was a dynamic leader and coalition woman in her own right. So many times when children see or read about Coretta, they're looking at her as a pretty widow who, who went on a crusade to make Dr. King's name a holiday. But Coretta Scott King was, before she met Martin, she was already an activist fighting for injustice, leading one woman crusades in Ohio. And she'd already, when she hooked up with Dr. King, she endured, bombings and death threats, but she had already endured like racial violence where in Alabama, her home, her mom and her dad's home had been burned. Her dad's lumber business had been burned down, and her dad did not run away. She's like 12 years old, 13 years old, and her mom is like, honey, let's get away from Marion, Alabama. Let's get away from Heidelberg, Alabama. And her dad was like, no, we're going to stand here and we're going to open up another business. And we're going to be successful, and we're going to let God be our champion, and we are not running away. And so when you look at Coretta Scott King, and so many people, probably adults at the time of her life, probably wondered, like, why does she stay with Dr. King? He is in the middle of murder and mayhem, and just these bad things are following their lives. They're being abused and victimized. Like, why does she stay? And it is because they were cosmic companions. She had been trained and she had been shaped for that very moment to be his wife and his companion. And so I want children to see her life through another lens, opposed to her just being a pretty face, because she was more than a pretty face. She was a woman who was a warrior, and she serves as an icon to show the rest of us how to be brave and to do hard things when it would be easier to just sit down and retreat,
Love that. Yeah. Good stuff coming from Alice Faye Duncan, folks. Keep your ears and eyes open, because all of that, and we are going to talk at another time about Yellow Dog Blues, so stay tuned for that. And thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of PBJAMZ, and stay tuned. More to come. And it sounds like Alice and I are going to have just like on speed dial, have each other, because we got to talk about all those books, Alice.
Okay, well, look, and let me say this, like, if you want to know more about my books and when they'll be available for purchase and those that are available now, visit my website, Alice Faye Duncan, and that's Faye with an E, AliceFayeDuncan.com. There you will find a wealth of information about the books, and you will find teacher guides. I have teacher guides for the majority of my books. They are free in PDF file, so they are there to help you in your pursuit as you're sharing the gift of literacy with your children or your students.
Love it. And we're going to link all that up below too, all of Alice's, her website and where to purchase this particular book, but all of her books will be accessible from her on her website. She'll show you how to get everything you need there. The teacher guides sound awesome. So just check out all that below, and I'll have lots of teacher tips here for you, as well as writing prompts to go along with this book. So thank you for joining us, and I hope I'll see you again very soon on PBJAMZ.
Thank you, Tani.
Thank you, Alice.
Longish books and bookish songs, tips for music teachers, interviews and book reviews, a little singing and dancing. PBJAMZ, yummy books and music. PBJAMZ, reading, writing, teaching. PBJAMZ, what a yummy treat. Jamming PBs all the time. PBJAMZ, jams, jams, jams. Picture books and jams. We'll see